The Wisdom of Insecurity, a deep philosophical analysis of Alan Watts' revolutionary insights. The existential crisis of modern consciousness. In the aftermath of two world wars, the collapse of traditional religious certainties, and the rise of scientific materialism, humanity found itself in what W.H. Auden famously termed the Age of Anxiety. Into this psychological and spiritual void stepped Alan Watts with The Wisdom of Insecurity, a work that would fundamentally challenge our most basic assumptions about security, identity, and the nature of existence itself. Published in 1951, this slim volume represents nothing less than a philosophical revolution. Watts doesn't merely offer comfort to the anxious mind, he performs radical surgery on the very foundations of Western thought. His central thesis, that our pursuit of security is itself the source of our insecurity, cuts to the heart of what it means to be human in an uncertain universe. But why does this matter? Because every day, millions of people wake up imprisoned by their own minds, trapped in cycles of worry, regret, and existential dread. They live as what Watts calls strangers and pilgrims in their own lives, forever seeking something just beyond reach. This analysis will explore 10 profound lessons from Watts' masterwork, each representing a key to unlocking authentic existence. Lesson 1. The Security Paradox, a fundamental contradiction of human consciousness. Watts begins with perhaps the most counterintuitive insight in all of philosophy. The desire for security and the feeling of insecurity are the same thing. This isn't merely a clever paradox, it's a devastating critique of the entire edifice of Western civilization. Consider the psychological mechanism at work. When we seek security, we implicitly acknowledge our insecurity. Every insurance policy purchased, every guarantee demanded, every attempt to control outcomes reinforces our fundamental vulnerability. We become like a person trying to lift themselves by pulling on their own shoelaces. The very effort defeats itself. The deeper philosophical implication concerns the nature of the ego self. Security-seeking creates what Watts calls the sense of an isolated I, a fortress mentality where consciousness attempts to separate itself from the flux of existence. But this separation is impossible because consciousness is itself part of the flow it's trying to escape. We end up like Ouroboros, the mythical snake consuming its own tail, engaged in a futile act of self-destruction disguised as self-preservation. This insight has profound implications for understanding anxiety disorders, depression, and what we might call civilizational neurosis. The modern epidemic of mental health issues isn't simply a result of external stressors, but of a fundamental misunderstanding of our relationship to uncertainty. We've built an entire culture on the impossible goal of eliminating risk, creating what Watts calls a breath retention contest, in which everyone is as taut as a drum and as purple as a beet. Lesson 2. The Temporal Illusion, deconstructing our relationship with time. Watts' analysis of time represents one of the most profound challenges to our ordinary consciousness. When he states, "There is no other reality than present reality," he's not making a simple observation, he's dismantling the entire structure of psychological time. The philosophical implications are staggering. If the past exists only as present memory, and the future only as present anticipation, then our entire orientation toward life is based on phantoms. We sacrifice the only reality we have, this moment, for abstractions that exist nowhere but in our minds. This connects to Henry Bergson's distinction between mechanical time, the time of clocks and calendars, and lived time, durée. Watts shows how modern civilization has become enslaved to mechanical time, losing touch with the organic rhythms of lived experience. We eat by the clock rather than hunger, sleep by schedule rather than fatigue, and work according to arbitrary divisions rather than natural energy cycles. The psychological consequences are enormous. When we live primarily in psychological time, we become alienated from our own direct experience. We develop what Watts calls a dimly aware present because consciousness is constantly elsewhere, planning, remembering, worrying, anticipating. This temporal displacement is perhaps the root cause of what Buddhists call dukkha and what existentialists term alienation. Consider the modern phenomenon of FOMO, fear of missing out, through this lens. It represents the anxious mind's attempt to be everywhere and every when, except here and now. We miss our actual lives while frantically trying not to miss anything. Lesson 3. The dissolution of the subject, object duality. Perhaps no insight in the wisdom of insecurity is more radical than Watts' deconstruction of the experiencing self. When he demonstrates that there is no separate I apart from present experience, he's attacking the very cornerstone of Western metaphysics, the Cartesian split between subject and object, mind and world. The philosophical implications reach back to Descartes' cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Watts shows that this foundational insight of modern philosophy rests on a fundamental error. There is thinking, but no separate thinker. There is experiencing, but no separate experiencer. What we call I is simply a conventional label for the flowing stream of present awareness. This isn't mere wordplay. Watts is revealing something profound about the nature of consciousness itself. When we look for the looker behind our looking, we find only more looking. When we search for the feeler behind our feelings, we discover only more feeling. The self is not an entity, but a process, not a noun, but a verb. The implications for understanding suffering are profound. Most psychological pain comes from the felt sense of being trapped inside a separate self that's having unpleasant experiences. But if there is no separate self, if we are our experiences rather than having them, then the entire framework of psychological entrapment collapses. This connects to both Buddhist psychology, anatta or non-self, and to cutting-edge neuroscience. Modern brain research increasingly suggests that the sense of being a unified self is a construction of the nervous system rather than a fundamental fact about consciousness. The self appears to be what neuroscientist Antonio Damasio calls the feeling of what happens, an ongoing narrative construction rather than a metaphysical entity. Lesson 4. The dialectics of change. Permanence as the enemy of life. Watts' treatment of change goes far beyond the Buddhist teaching that all things pass. He reveals change as the very essence of what we call reality, showing that our resistance to impermanence is actually resistance to existence itself. The philosophical depth here connects to Heraclitus' famous statement that you cannot step into the same river twice, but Watts goes further, showing that even the you who would step into the river is itself a pattern of change. There is no permanent self to be maintained, no fixed identity to be protected, no essential core that needs securing. This has profound implications for how we understand growth, healing, and transformation. Most approaches to personal development assume a self that owns experiences and can be improved. But Watts suggests that the very concept of self-improvement perpetuates the illusion of separateness that creates suffering in the first place. Consider the implications for our relationship with aging, illness, and death. These are typically seen as threats to the self, but Watts reveals them as expressions of the same life force that creates growth, health, and birth. To resist aging is to resist the very process that made growth possible. To fear death is to fear the principle that makes life meaningful. The ecological implications are equally profound. Our civilization's attempt to control and dominate nature reflects the same mindset that tries to fix and secure the self. Both represent a fundamental misunderstanding of our relationship to the larger processes of which we are part. Lesson 5. Somatic Wisdom via Cerebral Tyranny. Watts's critique of what he calls the European dissociation represents a profound analysis of the split between rational consciousness and embodied intelligence. This is an anti-intellectual sentiment, but a recognition that the brain, when disconnected from the body's wisdom, becomes a source of suffering rather than insight. The philosophical roots of this dissociation trace back through Descartes' mind-body dualism, Christian contempt for the flesh, and Platonic privileging of the ideal over the material. Watts shows how this split has created a civilization at war with its own biological foundation. Consider the implications for understanding desire and pleasure. In a truly integrated organism, desires arise organically and are satisfied naturally. The animal eats when hungry and stops when full. But the dissociated human brain pursues abstract ideas of satisfaction, leading to what Watts calls insatiable desires that can never be fulfilled because they're not based on actual bodily needs. This connects to contemporary research on embodied cognition, which shows that thinking happens throughout the body, not just in the brain. The heart has neural networks, the gut has more neurons than the spinal cord, and our entire physiology participates in what we call intelligence. The implications for healing are profound. Most therapeutic approaches focus on changing thoughts and beliefs, but Watts suggests that true healing happens when the brain-body split is mended. This aligns with trauma research showing that healing often requires accessing preverbal, somatic intelligence rather than purely cognitive insights. Lesson 6. The tyranny of symbolic thinking. Watts's analysis of language and conceptual thinking represents one of the deepest critiques of symbolic consciousness in Western philosophy. When he states that thoughts, ideas, and words are coins for real things, he's revealing how we've become trapped in what Alfred Korzybski called the map territory confusion. The philosophical implications connect to the entire Western tradition of privileging abstract thought over direct experience, from Plato's emphasis on eternal forms to modern science's focus on mathematical models. Our culture has increasingly substituted symbols for reality. We live in what Daniel Boorstin called the world of pseudo-emotions, a realm of representations, simulations, and conceptual constructions that obscure direct contact with life. This has created what Watts sees as a fundamental alienation. We no longer taste food. We consume calories. We don't make love. We have sexual experiences. We don't live in places. We occupy real estate. Every aspect of existence becomes filtered through conceptual frameworks that distance us from immediate reality. The implications for understanding meaning and purpose are profound. We typically seek meaning through narrative constructions, stories about who we are, where we're going, what it all means. But Watts suggests that meaning isn't something to be found in life, but is the very texture of immediate experience when we're fully present to it. This connects to phenomenology's emphasis on returning to the things themselves, and to contemplative traditions' focus on direct knowing that bypasses conceptual mediation. It also relates to contemporary concerns about digital media creating increasingly abstract relationships to reality. Lesson 7. The therapeutic power of total acceptance. Watts's insight that complete awareness dissolves problems represents a radical departure from most therapeutic approaches. Instead of analyzing, interpreting, or changing problematic experiences, he suggests that full awareness itself is transformative. The philosophical foundation lies in recognizing that most psychological problems are actually meta-problems, problems about having problems. We're not just afraid, we're afraid of being afraid. We're not just sad, we're sad about being sad. This creates what Gregory Bateson called double binds, self-reinforcing cycles where the solution becomes part of the problem. Complete awareness breaks this cycle by eliminating the division between the observer and the observed. When there's no separate self trying to fix the experience, the natural intelligence of the organism can respond appropriately. This is similar to what Carl Jung called the transcendent function, the psyche's innate capacity for healing when not interfered with by ego consciousness. The implications for understanding resistance are profound. Most therapeutic work involves overcoming resistance, but Watts suggests that resistance itself is a form of awareness, the organism's intelligence saying, "This doesn't fit." When we fully accept even our resistance, it often transforms naturally. This connects to contemporary third-wave therapies like acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, MBCT, which emphasize awareness and acceptance over symptom elimination. It also relates to trauma-informed approaches that recognize the wisdom of defensive responses rather than pathologizing them. Lesson 8. Death as the ground of meaning. Watts's treatment of mortality goes far beyond philosophical consolation. He reveals death as the necessary condition that makes life meaningful, beautiful, and precious. Without finitude, there could be no urgency, no poignancy, no significance to our choices and relationships. The philosophical depth connects to Heidegger's analysis of being toward death as the foundation of authentic existence. But while Heidegger emphasizes anxiety and resoluteness, Watts finds in mortality a source of liberation and even joy. Death isn't the opposite of life, but its most intimate partner. The silence that makes music possible, the emptiness that gives form meaning. This has profound implications for how we understand value and purpose. Most people seek meaning through permanence, lasting achievements, eternal love, immortal souls. But Watts shows that meaning emerges precisely from impermanence. A sunset is beautiful because it passes. A relationship is precious because it's fragile. A moment is significant because it won't come again. The implications for grief and loss are transformative. Instead of seeing death as the enemy of love, we can recognize it as love's most profound expression. The pain of loss isn't a mistake in the universe, but the price and proof of having truly connected with life. This connects to what Watts calls the law of reversed effort, the paradox that by accepting death, we truly live, while trying to avoid death prevents us from living fully. It's similar to what Rilke meant when he advised us to perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act just once with beauty and courage. Lesson 9. The futility of self-improvement. Perhaps no insight in Watts' work is more challenging to contemporary culture than his critique of self-improvement. In a society obsessed with optimization, enhancement, and personal development, Watts reveals these efforts as subtle forms of self-rejection that perpetuate the very problems they claim to solve. This philosophical foundation lies in understanding that all self-improvement assumes a divided self, a good I that's trying to fix a bad me. This division is artificial and counterproductive. It's like trying to lift yourself by pulling on your own hair or attempting to see your own eyes without a mirror. The psychological implications are profound. Self-improvement efforts often become forms of sophisticated self-hatred disguised as self-love. We exercise not from joy in movement, but from shame about our bodies. We meditate not from love of stillness, but from rejection of our minds. We practice spirituality not from natural wonder, but from a sense that our ordinary consciousness is inadequate. Watts isn't advocating passivity or fatalism. He's pointing toward what he calls natural morality, ethical behavior that arises spontaneously from wisdom rather than from shoulds and shouldn'ts. When we truly understand our interconnectedness with all life, harmful behavior becomes as impossible as stabbing ourselves. This connects to what Lao Tzu called Wu Wei, action that arises from harmony with natural principles rather than from ego-driven effort. It also relates to what humanistic psychology calls self-actualization, the organism's innate tendency toward growth and health when conditions are conducive. The implications for parenting, education, and therapy are revolutionary. Instead of trying to fix or improve people, we would create conditions for their natural wisdom to emerge. This is similar to what Carl Rogers called unconditional positive regard, and what Maria Montessori recognized as the child's innate drive toward learning and growth. Lesson 10. The art of sacred surrender. Watts' final insight, that we must let go to find what we're seeking, represents the culmination of his philosophical revolution. This isn't resignation or defeat, but what he calls the most radical recognition that we have no way of saving ourselves. It's the ultimate act of trust in the intelligence of existence itself. The philosophical depth connects to the mystical traditions of all cultures, which recognize surrender as the gateway to transcendence. But Watts secularizes this insight, showing that surrender isn't about submitting to external authority, but about aligning with the deeper currents of our own nature. The paradox is profound. The more we try to control our experience, the more chaotic it becomes. The more we chase happiness, the more it eludes us. The more we grasp for security, the more insecure we feel. Letting go reverses this process, allowing natural harmony to emerge. This has revolutionary implications for understanding freedom. Most people think freedom means the ability to control their circumstances. But Watts reveals a deeper freedom, liberation from the compulsive need to control. This is what he calls the freedom of insecurity, the space that opens when we stop struggling against uncertainty. The practical implications touch every aspect of life. In relationships, letting go of control allows genuine intimacy. In creativity, releasing attachment to outcomes allows authentic expression. In spirituality, surrendering the seeking itself allows what is sought to reveal itself. This connects to what quantum physics reveals about the observer effect, the way our attempts to measure reality inevitably disturb it. At the deepest level, Watts is pointing toward a way of being that doesn't interfere with the mystery of existence, but allows it to unfold naturally. Conclusion: the revolution of consciousness. Alan Watts' The Wisdom of Insecurity isn't merely a philosophical treatise. It's a manual for a complete revolution of consciousness. Each lesson builds toward a radical reorientation of human awareness, away from the futile quest for separate security and toward what he calls the marvelous moment of present reality. The implications extend far beyond personal psychology. If even a significant minority of people truly grasp these insights, it would transform civilization itself. We would create economic systems based on sufficiency rather than endless growth. We would develop political structures based on cooperation rather than domination. We would approach environmental challenges as expressions of our interconnectedness rather than problems to be solved by the same consciousness that created them. But the revolution begins where all real change begins, in the depths of individual awareness. When we stop trying to escape the present moment, we discover that the present moment is where life has always been happening. When we cease the futile quest to secure the separate self, we realize our fundamental unity with the cosmic process itself. This is what Watts calls the wisdom of insecurity. Not knowledge about insecurity, but the profound intelligence that emerges when we embrace uncertainty as the very ground of existence. It's a wisdom as ancient as the first human who looked up at the stars and felt both cosmic insignificance and infinite wonder. It's as contemporary as the recognition that in a quantum universe, uncertainty isn't a bug, but a feature. The choice before us is clear. We can continue the exhausting attempt to make the river flow uphill, or we can learn to navigate by moving with the current. We can persist in the impossible quest to capture life in conceptual containers, or we can discover the freedom of dancing with the unknown. As Watts reminds us, we are living in a culture entirely hypnotized by the illusion of time, in which the so-called present moment is felt as nothing but an infinitesimal hairline between an all-powerfully causative past and an absorbingly important future. The wisdom of insecurity invites us to wake up from this hypnosis and discover that eternity isn't somewhere else. It's the depth dimension of now. In the end, these 10 lessons point toward a single recognition: that what we've been seeking through all our striving and struggling is already here, already present, already complete, not as an achievement to be won, but as the very ground of our being, not as a future possibility, but as the eternal now that never comes and never goes, but simply is. The changeless awareness within which all change appears, the unshakable stillness at the heart of all movement. The wisdom that needs no security, because it recognizes itself as the very source of whatever arises. This is the ultimate wisdom of insecurity. That when we stop running from uncertainty, we discover that uncertainty and freedom are the same thing. And in that recognition, the search ends, not in finding something new, but in realizing what was never lost.